Welcome to Measuring Success Right, the official podcast of the Marriott Student Review, a podcast for students by students, where we connect the leaders of tomorrow with the issues of today.
Welcome, everyone, to the Measuring Success Right podcast. My name is Hunter Hawkins, one of your hosts.
And I'm Emily, another one of your hosts, and today we're with Dr. Sainsbury. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Absolutely.
So just to kick our podcast off, we would love if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
So I grew up in a working class family in Salt Lake Valley.
Okay.
Most of my life I was there, except for a short stint in Australia for about a year. And my parents divorced when I was about 11, and then after that I had a really, really difficult family life. Unfortunately, lots of different difficulties, including abuse and having to move around all the time. I lived in 18 different places before I graduated from high school. My senior year of high school, and I was born in the church, baptized, but did not attend a lot, wasn't very active, as a teenager. When I was a senior in high school, I was kind of at a breaking point personally, and I wrote something very flippant and not nice to my seminary teacher. And he called me that night. Called me at my house, and I thought that was kind of weird a little bit that someone cared like that. But we talked for a few minutes, and he was concerned enough about me that he drove across the valley, and we sat on my nice little kind of white trash couch out in the front yard and talked for about an hour. This was like February, this time of year, and I walked away from that discussion thinking two things. The first was that here's someone who really cares about me. And second, this thing about Jesus, it might really be real. Like I felt something about it. And so I started kind of focusing more in seminary. About the same time, I met a young lady and started dating her. And she was an amazing example of what it is to be loving and Christ-like. And so I kind of started to turn the ship around, if you will. Eventually, right before I turned 20, I went on a mission to Italy and came home and married that girl, my wife Meredith. And I decided I wanted to try and do for others what this teacher had done for me. His name was Brother Sunwall, Pete Sunwall. He was only actually a seminary teacher for a couple of years, and then he became a doctor.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So anyway, I was lucky enough to be hired as a full-time seminary teacher and worked in seminaries and institutes for about 27 years.
Wow.
I got my bachelor's in political science. I actually got an MPA from the Marriott School here at BYU.
Super cool.
And then a PhD in American history. And 4 years ago, I came down here to BYU to do a rotation for a couple of years, and then taught adjunct. And then this is my first year as a full professor. I'm an associate professor of church history and doctrine. And I have 3 sons, 26 to 21, all adults. And my wife and I love our dogs, probably sometimes more than our sons. And she's actually a 9-time cancer survivor.
Wow.
And she's an amazing, amazing woman. So, yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Wow, that is really great. I love hearing inspirational stories of somebody stepping in your life when they necessarily didn't need to and really changed the course of your entire life.
Well, and there's even more to it that I failed to mention, and that is that when I was here at the rotation here at BYU, that teacher that I'd had, his son took my class.
Oh, wow.
Jeff Sunwall and his wife. They just got married. And he's told me before I can share this story, so I'm okay sharing it. But it was a time when they were struggling a little bit with faith issues. And and they let me know that they actually took 2 classes from me. He took 3 classes from me.
Oh, wow.
And he let me know that I was able to help he and his wife deal with some things and kind of stay stable. So it's a really powerful example, all right? Like over 30 years ago, this man steps into my life and helps put me on a different trajectory, one that leads me to do what he did for me for thousands and thousands of people.
Right.
And then full circle, his son walks into my classroom in a time of need, and I got to be part of God's plan for him and helping him. So that's a lesson I've learned very powerfully, is that even the smallest acts of kindness that we do have huge effects for a long time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. That really is incredible how you were able to help each other, you know?
Yeah.
And I just think it's so cool when we get those opportunities and blessings to do that, to you know, receive that goodness and change our lives, and then be able to help other people.
Absolutely.
I had 2 quick questions off that story. What really comes to mind is that your mentor, soon-to-be mentor, your seminary teacher, he was willing and prepared to help others in need that needed that help. And then also you kind of, without really knowing it, asked for mentorship and help in that moment by writing that kind of nasty
Yeah,
card.
it was a cry for help, definitely.
And kind of 2 questions off that is, one, how can we, as people preparing to be mentors and be mentors, how can we be ready to mentor? And then also, how can we be ready to receive mentorship when we are in a time of need?
Those are great questions. I think to be prepared to be mentors, that's just being a disciple of Jesus Christ. I mean, Jesus Christ is the ultimate mentor. So the more we fashion our life after him, obviously the more prepared we're going to be. But I think it's even more than that, and we have to be observant, quick to observe. Like there's a lot of us have just a personality that is observant and full of empathy. Others of us don't, but intentionality in that, like you're actively looking to see who needs help. Like that's your prayer in the morning. Like, let me be a help to someone. I've prayed that prayer many times since my mission, and have just had so many experiences where God is really willing to use us to help others if we just ask. Like, he'll put us in the orbit of those that we need. And then I think your other question may be even more important. Like, can we be humble enough to accept help, to accept mentorship? Can we realize that the best version of us depends on the best version of others, and that we're not alone in this, and that even if we're at the top of our field, say in academia or in business or whatever, that everyone has something to teach us. I can remember very clearly, I had an opportunity to speak at a meeting that President Eyring was in. I was speaking right before him.
Oh, wow.
It was a seminary graduation. And of course, I was really nervous, but that's not the story. The story is that the speaker before me was the seminary council president, a young girl, right, 18 years old. And as she was teaching at the pulpit, or speaking at the pulpit, I'm sitting right next to President Eyring, and I watch him pull out of his pocket these scripture tabs, colored tabs, and put it next to the scripture she's talking about, and with his pen or pencil, I can't remember what it was, starts writing. And like, I'm just totally a bad person because I kept looking over to see what he was writing. But he was writing an insight. I don't remember what it was, but I remember that he was writing an insight that he was learning from this 18-year-old girl. It's that has never left me. Here you have someone who at the time was in the first presidency of the church, as he is now, and here's an 18-year-old girl that hasn't stepped a day out of high school yet, who's teaching the best she can with the knowledge she has, and he's learning from it. And I made a mental note that day, like, I can learn from anybody, and I should be open to learning from anybody. And I've been blessed by that really blessed by that. So thanks, President Eyring.
Yeah, that's so cool. Just, I mean, he really is a known and respected person, but just seeing, him learning from, I think you're absolutely right that we really can learn from anybody, whether it's, a 5-year-old or the most wise, incredible person ever. It's neat just to see how you can learn things.
Absolutely.
And just gain perspective from everybody.
And I think the main point of both those answers that you said was being humble in both cases. Because I feel like sometimes we get into a position of not power, but I would say position of knowledge, and we say, hey, I want to mentor someone. And sometimes we're trying to put ourselves out there when in reality, no one's ready for us yet. And we have to be humble enough to sit back and just be observant, like you were saying, to see who in our surrounding area is ready to receive those messages. And then like you both were saying, we have to be humble in any situation to be ready to receive messages from anybody else. I feel like that's a hard thing to do when, like you said, we could be the top person in some field and then somebody who's just starting out is giving insight and you're like, I don't need to listen to them. I'm way more advanced than them, when in reality they're bringing amazing experiences that we could learn from ourselves, but we aren't humble enough to receive that message.
Yeah.
But great insight.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So like you mentioned before, you're now a professor at BYU. You're teaching, and I mean that's how we know each other. I'm taking your class, and it's an incredible class. And I guess you already covered this a little bit, but did you have any more thoughts on just how you got into the career you have today? And
yeah, sure. So obviously I got into religious education because of that seminary teacher and wanting to do for others what he did for me. I had a dream when I was 26, 27. I'd only started teaching seminary for a few years. And it's one of those dreams. I don't know if you've ever had a dream where it's like so realistic, like you don't know the difference. And it was one of those. I don't have those very often. And I distinctly remember it was, I was shaking hands down some kind of church hall with people. And the last person was President Hinckley, who was president of the church at the time.
Oh, wow.
And so I got to him and I shook his hand, and he looked at me and he said, "Oh yes, Derek Sainsbury from BYU," and I was like, "No," and he gave me this look, this like little wink look, like, I know something you don't know, right? And it's so vivid. Just retelling it now, I can see it in my mind. It was so vivid. And but like that was never like a pressing desire for me to go to BYU or to be at BYU. I loved working with teenagers and helping them like I'd been helped. I kept getting my degrees and stuff, mostly because I wanted to, not because I was aiming for BYU. And then out of the blue, they asked me, like I said, 4 years ago, to come here and do a rotation for a couple of years, and I just fell in love with it. And I remembered that dream, and I could almost see President Hinckley winking at me. And so when the position came up for a full-time hire, I applied and was blessed enough to be able to stay here and be a part of this. So I think God knows in my life, and I think this is probably true for others, kind of where we're going and where we need to be going, even when we don't, or even if that's not like the plan that we have. And so that's kind of why I'm here. The biggest, I mean, I am a scholar. I have published work. I do research and so forth. But I'm really here for teaching. My biggest thing is working with students and listening to them, learning from them, and hopefully helping them.
Yeah.
So I was actually hired to teach the Foundations of the Restoration class that you all have to take. And so, I love it. I love the Restoration. That's where my academic work is in that time period of American history. And I really enjoy using it as an opportunity to teach skills of how to discern truth, so that when my students leave the class, they haven't just learned facts or ideas or doctrines about the Restoration, but they have a good tool set for themselves to be able to understand in this world of crazy misinformation and disinformation, to be able to understand what is truth and what is not. And that's actually my favorite part about the class itself.
Well, that's great. I really appreciate professors like yourself who want to be there for the students and to be there for teaching. I have a friend who just graduated from a school on the East Coast, came over here, and I asked him, how was it? How'd you enjoy it? Because my only experience in college is BYU.
Right.
And he said it wasn't amazing because the teachers were more focused on their research, which I imagine was important, but they weren't there to teach students. They weren't there to help them learn and grow. It was more about their research, which I feel is a real bummer. And I think that's one great thing about BYU is we have so many different professors in so many different colleges that really help the students find success, learn, and grow.
Absolutely. It's one of the things I love about this place, to be honest, is that focus on undergraduate teaching and on students.
I also loved just how you were focusing on truth, and as students, we're out there and we're looking for things, and there's a lot of different options just for majors and for life choices and career paths, and just, I think it's so important just to try and find that truth, and just figure out what is true in the world and how to find the good and to seek the good, whether that's professionally or personally or spiritually, like whatever aspect that is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there any sort of specific moment in your life that you've seen benefits of making a specific decision?
I think for me, this is kind of a recent one. I struggle with, I have struggled for the past 10 years with some mental health challenges. And back in September, there was a psychologist who came and spoke, gave a presentation here at BYU to our college. Mm-hmm. And I felt a real connection with her, felt like what she was presenting was about students, right? It was about you and how to look for, signs and how to help with mental health. But something, kind of clicked for me. And so she has her own private practice as well, but I guess it's pretty crowded, and she doesn't have and I basically forced my way in. I told her she was taking me as a client. And so I've been working with her. In fact, I was there this morning since October. And there were some things in my life that I wasn't getting past that were limiting my ability to be the best I could be as a professor, the best I could be as a father, the best I could be as a husband, the best I could be as a disciple of Christ, that come from my background, that I'm doing really great. Like, I'm awesome.
Yeah.
Like I told her today, well, I'm not awesome, but I'm feeling awesome. And I in fact, I told her today, I think we can back off how much we have to meet. And so I think whether it's mental health or whether you feel some kind of inclination that you need to go get another degree, or you feel like you need to learn a new skill, or you need to switch jobs, which often happens, in the business world, that we follow those promptings, those thoughts, that we trust in it, even if it can be scary or whatever. I'm so grateful I did, because I've been able to reorder my thinking and my brain in such a way that I'm doing so much better, right? And I'm old, right? And so, an old dog can be taught new tricks. But I think one of the keys to success is really being willing to follow some gut instincts that may sound risky, and being and trusting that that's coming from heaven, and being willing to kind of take that first step in the darkness and see what happens.
I love that. I love that you talked about trust and being willing to put that foot forward, and that.
So our last few questions for you are questions we ask every guest, and they pertain to the Marriott School of Business's values, and they're really great. They hint on a lot of the stuff you've talked about today. So the vision of the Marriott School is we aspire to transform the world through Christ-like leadership. How have you implemented this in your work or life, and what are the fruits of it?
So I think Christ-like leadership is so opposite of the way the world generally views leadership, right? Yeah. That you're the top dog, you're the one that sets the vision and tone for everything, and everybody's there to kind of serve you and help you succeed so that the company or the organization succeeded. And I mean, that's been true through all time, kind of that pyramid, right, where the leader is at the top of the pyramid. In Christ, he tells us to flip the pyramid upside down. He says that whoever's the greatest, whoever's the leader, should be least and serve all. And we've talked about this in class, Emily, where my favorite story of the Savior is the washing of the feet of the apostles, and how that was something that was generally done by a servant, but the language in John is so specific that Christ takes off his outer layer of clothing, stripping down, as it were, to the role of a servant, because clothing meant status. Clothing meant who you were in society, the type of clothing you were able to wear, or even the amount of clothing. And when he's doing, that's why Peter is so upset, right? Is that, washing the feet is one thing, like stripping down to the role of a servant to do it, and being that self-abasing is something altogether different. And when he's done and he puts his outer clothes back on, he says, basically, do you know what I've done? And that's when he teaches about, if you're the greatest, you should be the least and serve all. And then teaches, a new commandment I give unto you, that ye love one another as I have loved you. Not love thy neighbor as thyself. It's different. It's a new commandment, he says. And he's just given them an example. Right? Here's the person they believe and is God on earth. Mm-hmm. And he's going down the lowest. So when I think of Christ-like leadership and how it can transform a family, how it can transform a business organization or a non-for-profit or any kind of organization, I think of leaders who are constantly serving others. They don't put themselves on a higher plane. Of course, they've got to make the big decisions in the end, but the way they treat and the way they look out for others is that kind of servant leadership. And when someone's like that, you're drawn to them. You think of some of the greatest leaders, generals in warfare throughout the history of the world, those that are like at the front line, rallying the troops, Washington at Valley Forge, eating the same food. People are drawn to that. I think that's why we're drawn to Christ too, right? He went from his high position, came down and lived among us, and then even went further down by suffering for our sins. And we're drawn to that. And so I've just seen that in my life. When I do that, people are drawn to me. When other people do that in organizations, whether it's a bishop, whether it's a supervisor at work, when they're like that, I'm drawn to them. I want to do what they're asking me to do, and I feel valued. And it just, I think, I think the wording you said in there was transform. Mm-hmm. It does transform any organization that it's a part of, because people become more productive, people become more motivated, people become more willing to sacrifice themselves because they see this servant leadership.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. You actually touched on this a little bit in your previous answer, but the Marriott School mission is to develop leaders. What are attributes of leaders? What do they look like, and how can we become them? Do you have any additional thoughts?
Yeah, I think the main thing is that, and I'd add to that what's kind of inferred by that, and that is that the most important thing in life, so this is whether you're talking about being a leader or not, but certainly as a leader, is relationships. End of sentence. Relationships are what matter. I was a PhD student up at the University of Utah. My wife was in the hospital for some pneumonia-related things after doing chemo, And I went to my night class anyway. And because I had a professor, not this professor, but a different professor, who, if you didn't show up, you had to do two of the assignments instead of just the one you missed.
Oh my gosh.
So you had to do the one you missed plus another one in addition. And so my wife and I made a calculated decision that it would be better for me to just go up there for the 2 hours and then come back than to spend those 2 hours with her and then have to spend 4 more hours basically in doing the work. And so I got up there, and this wasn't this professor, it was a different one, but I was just kind of like assuming that this was going to be the same kind of a thing. And he said, "Well, you look terrible. You know, what's going on?"
Oh, no.
and I explained, and he's like, "What are you doing here?" And I explained to him my reasoning. And I'll never forget this. Not a member of our church. He ended up being the chair of my dissertation. But he looked at me and he said, "If you haven't learned it yet, relationships are the most important thing. Like, go home." And I've never forgotten that. I mean, I knew that.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like I didn't care about my wife. We were making a calculated decision.
Right.
But I've never forgotten that. And so I'd say if you're trying to become a leader, if you can learn to focus on relationships. So going back to what we just talked about, the first relationship you have to be able to be focused on is your relationship with heaven. Is that right? You know? And then is your relationship with those that you love the most, family, friends, is that right? And then the relationships at work can be right. But people are always more important than the bottom line or getting things done or getting certain kind of accolades or whatever. When we understand that heaven is not an award, it's not a reward, that it's a deep and abiding and eternal relationship, that's what makes it heaven, then I think we start to understand what's really going on. And if our purpose here is to prepare for there, then I think the best thing that we can do is work on our relationships with heaven, with those closest to us, and those, you know, in our orbits in work or whatever. That's what's going to make us a good leader. That's what's going to make people be drawn to us and want to work for us or help us in whatever project we're doing as a leader, is if we care about relationships.
Yeah, I really like that comment. I haven't heard that before, and I really do like that. I think in the business world, they use, instead of the word relationships, they use connections. Like, leaders with connections can do great things. Yeah. But I like relationships better because connection sounds like you're just being friends with them or
networking.
Networking, exactly, just to get your own agenda pushed. But I think relationships, that's a two-way road. Like, we're building a relationship with one another, not just to benefit myself or benefit you, but to really become better together at the same time. I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's few things I absolutely know in the world. That's one of them. Yeah. That it's about relationships.
Totally. Love that. The next question we have highlights the values of the business school. So the values are faith in Christ, integrity in action, respect for all, and excellence. Why do you think these are important? Does one stand out to you, and do you have an experience with one of them?
I think I'd go on the respect for all. I mean, I've kind of already touched on it with the girl that gave the talk and President Eyring, learning from her. I learned it on my mission, where I would knock on a door and see somebody and in my mind go, they have no interest at all. And find out that they're the only one that day that did have interest.
That's how it always goes.
I learned it from, just so many things that I've totally changed my view about anybody. And I think that comes too by building that relationship with heaven, because as we build that relationship with heaven, we become more like heaven. And as we know, heaven is no respecter of persons. God sees us all equally, despite any kind of false, connections we make or don't make. And I think it's really easy let's say in an organization, let's put it kind of, where this school is most, some kind of NPO or business or whatever, like the squeaky wheels get greased all the time, right? The person that you connect with really well for common interests, or they're in the office next door or whatever. But what about all the others, right? What about all the others? That's kind of what, when I'm sitting in the classroom, that's kind of what my mind's going through. Like, there's students that answer all the questions. There's students who've come to talk to me. What about the others? And respect for all, I think, means we don't have to always agree with what everybody says, but we can always agree that everybody is worth listening to. And everybody is worth, just because they're a child of God means they're of inherent worth, even if they don't know that or don't feel that or don't believe it. And because Christ descended below all for them, they're even of more worth. And I can remember I was on a research trip in Boston, and I was taking public transport, which, kudos to Boston. It's pretty safe, very nice. And I was waiting for a bus, and this homeless gentleman with a walker sits next to me, and he asked me for a light cigarette, and I'm like, I don't have any of that. He's, well, you got any money? I'm like, sure, yeah. What do you want? Gave him a couple dollars. We just started talking, and the next day, I came back from research. He was there again, waiting for me. Next day, he was there again, waiting for me. Next day, waiting for me. Day I have to leave. He's like, I want to keep talking, And so I said, come on the bus. I'll pay for you to get on the bus, and we'll, till I have to get off. And there he and I are. His name was Mark, I remember. We're singing songs from the 80s together out loud on the bus.
Oh, wow. And
he's telling me, you're the first adult that's talked with me in months. And I'm thinking, wow. Really? I'm not great. I'm not saying I'm great. I'm like, really? Like, all the people there in his orbit, including others that are struggling with the struggles he had, nobody's willing to have a conversation past, can I have a light, or you got a few bucks or whatever. And so I think respect for all would be, would include, if you're in charge of some kind of organization, that everyone in that organization is seen by you. Within limits, all right? I mean, if you're the CEO of a million, but the people, that everybody feels seen and feels valued, I think that's that's a great value there, to respect everyone, because everyone does have something to teach us, and everyone is just worthy of respect because of what they are, who they are.
Yeah, I completely agree. That was an amazing story, just having that, building that relationship, with that guy. And thank you so much for all of your insights and thoughts. We want to wrap up today with just one final question that we ask everybody, which is just, how do you measure success?
I used to measure success by what do I accomplish? What have I done? Like, I can remember distinctly thinking, like, I'm not comfortable. I'm not doing anything. I'm not accomplishing anything. I need to do something. And going back to what we talked about previously, I've come to see success as in whatever we're looking at, my church calling, me as a parent or a husband, a scholar, a teacher. I measure success by relationships, plain and simple. For example, one of my sons is inactive in the church, and I used to look at success about whether or not he made the decisions that I'd like him to make. Mm-hmm. And when I changed that to a relationship, he and I are as tight as can be, right? Mm-hmm. He hasn't changed his mind about other stuff. I don't know if he will, but like, our relationship is awesome. And that, for me, is success. So whether that's in that scenario, whether you're a great, leader in business and you're leaving to go somewhere else and everybody's just devastated because you've built those kind of relationships, and in those relationships you've invested in them to the point where people are succeeding better than they would have because you've built that relationship. And I think, I know that for me is how I measure success.
Wow, that was really good. Thank you so much for that insight.
Yeah.
Make sure you subscribe to our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, or SoundCloud so you never miss an episode. Be a friend and tell a friend about measuring success right.
This podcast is a project of the Marriott Student Review at Brigham Young University. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Marriott Student Review or online at marriottstudentreview.org.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect official policy or position of Brigham Young University or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.